Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video and another plug side chat. In this video I wanted to talk a little bit more about what I consider the various generations of electric vehicles and how I'm sort of defining them, because I sort of had a realization in terms of what electric vehicles need to be capable of in order to be truly mainstream. And I really think they need to make that transition into what I would call a third generation electric vehicle. So, I mean, yes, a big component of that is going to be price, but there's still some basic functionality that needs to happen. And I don't want to dive too deep into the exact numbers, right? But what I think would define a third generation of the modern electric vehicle. So to start with, I would say that something like the Tesla Model 3 is getting very, very close, but it's still short in what I consider a key component that needs to happen for that third generation leap to be made. So essentially, I would say something like the new Nissan Leaf or the Bolt EV. They're sort of the entrance into what you would expect out of a second generation electric vehicle. And there are some shortcomings that they have, typically around the charging speeds, things like that. But they're basically the baseline of what you should expect for a second generation electric vehicle. In the case of the Leaf, it's also the range is a little bit short. I really do think second generation electric vehicles need to be at least 200 miles of range, of course, in ideal conditions and standardized testing. And the Model 3, like I said, is probably the upper end. Anything past that, and you really are sort of bridging over into what I would consider a third generation vehicle. And that's why, after looking at all the numbers, seeing everything that it's capable of, I think the Porsche Taycan is going to actually be the first third generation electric vehicle. And there's a very key reason why. And that is essentially its ability to charge at ultra fast speeds. So typical DC fast charging speeds, those are good enough for most people, but it still sort of forces you to make some sacrifices. As much as it pains me to say, pretty much any electric vehicle, including the Tesla Model 3 that you buy today, will make a number of buyers make concessions. The best way to put it is, I feel like the technology is a bit narcissistic, and we already have so much technology that fits into that, right? You guys are staring into a screen right now. So much of our technology demands our attention. Right now, electric vehicles are like that. And that's actually maybe the one advantage that internal combustion engine vehicles have at this point. That the one principal advantage is that it's not about them, it's about the driver. It's about the person in the vehicle, not about the vehicle itself. And that's the thing that needs to change with electric vehicles. And I realize this sounds sort of ironic, saying that a Porsche isn't demanding attention, and it is, but it's about the driver. And that's the fundamental shift that happens with a car like the Porsche Taycan, right? Because it fits whatever you want it to be. So if you're one of those road warriors who wants to drive for 3 hours and only stop for 10 minutes, well, it facilitates that, it supports that. If you're like me, where you still prefer to make at least one long stop, well, because it has such a big battery, you're paid back and rewarded for sitting down and having a dinner, stretching your legs, taking a break, and then getting back on the road again. You still get that 3 hours of driving. Whereas some of the other vehicles, right, like the Tesla Model 3, for example, sure, you could sit down and eat for 45 minutes to an hour and you'd get that 3 hours of driving out of it. but you're still not able to stop for 10 minutes and get 3 hours of driving out of it. You might get an hour and a half, right? So, I mean, it's good, but it's about a third of what it needs to be to the point where an average American doesn't need to change to support the vehicle itself. And that's the big holdup, and that's the transition point, I feel like, between the second generation and third generation modern electric vehicles are which vehicles provide owners with the ability to adopt them into their lives and not have to change much fundamentally about what they do. Now, we know that people make sacrifices by having to go out of their way to go to gas stations and do inordinate amounts of maintenance, right, to support this internal combustion engine that's literally trying to blow itself apart every time it's running. We know that people are already making concessions, but it fades into the background because it's a concession that they've always made. Whereas current second generation electric vehicles require different concessions, and those seem like they're new or they're daunting, right? We know it's more convenient to just show up at your house and plug in and not worry about it. But for some people, they don't see that yet. They don't see that they're really trading concessions with a second generation modern electric vehicle as opposed to adding new ones. But something like the Porsche Taycan, well, it really just eliminates those concessions altogether. And at that point, when you're traveling, if you're one of those gasoline powered engine driving people who, like I said, only stop for gasoline, use the bathroom, and then get back on the road again, well, it facilitates that. At worst, you're losing a couple of minutes a stop, or maybe you may need to make two stops over 600 miles instead of one. But it still eliminates all of those other concessions that you need to make. So, and that's what needs to happen. It needs to be less and less about the car and more about the drivers. And that's how we'll make that transition to third generation electric vehicles. And that's how they'll take over and become mainstream when it becomes more about the drivers and the owners and the passengers than it is about the car itself. And of course, yes, the price needs to come down because what ultimately needs to happen is those types of vehicles, the Porsche Taycans, they need to be available to people who can afford average MSRP cars, and they need to become available to people who can only afford entry-level cars. And that's the point at which EVs will become mainstream. I'd love to hear what you think about this. If you think I'm off base, if you think 120 kilowatt charging is fast enough, or if you think 350 kilowatt charging isn't fast enough, if you think that I'm off base and feeling like it's more about the cars now than it is about the drivers, I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and thank you for watching.